In this video, I'll be giving you my top 10 tips to get clean audio for film. They say that audio is half of the experience when watching a video, and one of the biggest mistakes that I see beginner filmmakers make is neglecting good audio. You can have a super cinematic image, but if bad audio is accompanying that image, it will take your production value down. So let's get into it. Tip number 1 is record audio in a place with little to no reverb or echo. Things like hardwood floors, bare walls, and empty ceilings are a good audio's worst nightmare. Make sure that the room you're recording in has as much sound dampening as possible. Things like carpet, materials on the walls, and pretty much anything that doesn't make surfaces flat will be your friend if you're trying to record good audio. In the ideal situation, you'd have acoustic foam panels all the way around the room to completely get rid of any reverb, but we know that's not possible. So what you can do to help dampen the sound in a room is to put up light stands with blankets over them, and then get those blankets as close to your subject as possible while not getting them in the shot. Tip number 2 is to get the mic as close to your subject as possible. To help illustrate this, here's me talking with the mic 1 foot away from my mouth, and here's the audio coming straight from the camera. So as you can see, the volume of my voice was the same in both of those clips, but you notice that the closer to my mouth the mic was, the better it sounded. This is why it's so important to have a boom operator on your video shoots so that they can get the mic as close to the subject as possible. And going off of that is tip number 3, which is what to do when you don't have a boom operator. What I found that works great when I don't have a boom operator is to get a mic stand and put my boom mic on the stand. This works great for sit-down interviews or any kind of shot where the subject isn't moving. If they are moving, you either need to get a boom operator or hook up a lav mic to them to make sure that the mic is always close to them. Tip number 4 is get creative about where to place the mic so that it's not seen. If you have 2 actors talking to each other, you can have one of them hold your mic or a cell phone to capture the audio and then frame them in a way to where you can't see the microphone. Pretty much anytime you see a shot of 2 people driving in the car, they have a mic in the car, but it's hidden behind the dashboard or behind some other obstacle that makes it so that it isn't seen in the shot. Or they do something called ADR, which means they go in and record their audio in a studio after filming the scene while trying to match the words with what they see on the screen. Creativity is so important in filmmaking, so make sure that you stretch those creative muscles in trying to figure out where to hide microphones, because not having good audio can and will ruin your film. Tip number 5 is test your recording levels before you start filming and make sure that you aren't peaking. If the mic level is too hot, it'll cause distortion. So always test your mic level before you're filming to make sure that it's not distorting. What I always do is I always have my subject talk as loud as they can before we start filming so that I can test my mic levels and I make sure that it isn't peaking. If you can see your mic levels, make sure that the loudest noise is at most -6 dB. Also keep in mind that sometimes people will get louder if they become excited when they talk, or if they laugh, that can usually be louder as well, so make sure that you remember that. Tip number 6 is to do a sync clap when using external recorders. This helps you to be able to match up your external audio with your in-camera audio. Sometimes if there are multiple takes, I'll clap the same number of times as the take so that I can easily see which audio matches up where. This also helps the synchronization software to sync up your audio, so I'd always make sure to do a sync clap as soon as you start recording. Tip number 7 is to use a dead cat when filming outside when it's windy, or try to block the wind in any way that you can. Try to point the mic in the same direction that the wind is blowing in if possible, so that the wind isn't blowing directly into the microphone. Or try to block the wind with a wall, a person, or anything else that could help you block that wind. Tip number 8 is to record with 2 mics at the same time so that you can always have a backup. This is a best case scenario, and I know that many beginner filmmakers won't have the luxury of having 2 mics to record with at the same time, but if possible, and especially on shoots that have a big budget, have 2 mics recording at the same time. Usually a boom mic and a lav mic in case one of them fails or ends up distorting. The mic that I use has a cool feature where it actually records 2 audio files at the same time, one at a normal audio level and then one 6 dB lower than the normal audio level. This makes it so that if there's clipping or distortion on the normal audio level, I can just stick in the lower recording that's 6 dB lower where there's no distortion. Tip number 9 is to use editing tools to help your audio sound the best. The 2 most common tools that I use are EQ and compression. EQ makes it so that you can take a certain frequency and make it louder or softer. With the voice, I usually add a high pass filter, and I usually make the low end a bit quieter, and I boost the mid-high frequencies. This makes it so that your voice cuts through and doesn't sound all muffled. Here's what different sentences sound like with different EQ patterns. This is what my voice sounds like boosting the low end and reducing the high end. As you can tell, it sounds way too muffled and not pleasing at all. This is what my voice sounds like with just the midtones boosted and everything else cut. This is a cool effect to use if you want to make it sound like you're talking through a phone. And this is what it sounds like to boost the high frequencies and cut out the low frequencies. Compression is another tool that I use to make the loud parts of an audio track quieter, and it makes the quiet parts of a track louder. It just kind of evens out your whole audio track so that it's all playing at the same volume level. And finally, tip number 10 is to listen to your audio through different headphones and speakers. Some speakers have a lot more low ends than cheap laptop speakers, so as you're listening to your audio through different speakers, make sure that it sounds good on each speaker and that it's optimized for the audience that will be watching the video. For example, if most of the people watching your video will be watching the video on a smartphone, then play your video on a smartphone before exporting out the final to make sure that it sounds good. If most people will be watching your video on a computer, then make sure that you listen to your videos on computer speakers as well as headphones, and then make any adjustments so that it sounds good in every way that you listen to it. Now I want to talk to you about the different types of microphones that you'd use for film, which ones are the most popular, and which ones I'd recommend that you buy. The most common type of microphone for film is a shotgun mic, and I would recommend that you buy the Tascam DR10 SG if you have a lower budget, or if you have a bigger budget for audio, I'd recommend buying the Rode NTG3 with a Zoom H4n or a Zoom H6. The second most common type of microphone for film is a lavalier mic, or a lav mic for short. You can get a relatively inexpensive lav mic that plugs right into your phone for around $65 if you go with the Rode Smart Lav Plus. A mid-range lav mic would be a Tascam DR10L, which is great for weddings, and then a high-end lav mic would be a Sennheiser EW112P G4. And I have links to all of these microphones and any other audio gear that I'd recommend in my kit. Now remember, if you can't afford a certain piece of equipment just yet, I always recommend that you rent gear until you can afford it so that you can take your production quality to the next level. If you do decide to rent gear, make sure that you play around with it enough to know how it works and so that you can test it out before your shoot to make sure that your shoot goes smoothly. But that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.